Hi all. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Kay Gabriel. My pronouns are she and her. Welcome to my and Imogen's curation of the Segue series.
Hi, everyone. I'm Imogen Christian Smith. My pronouns, if you need to gender me, are they, them. Welcome to our series. Before we get started, we first acknowledge that we're calling into you from Lenape-Hoking on the traditional lands of the Lenape, Shinnecock, Munsee, and Canarsie peoples. That resources used in the production of this series have been culled from stolen lands far and near, that both artist space as well as our homes are places of commune and work and learning were built by hands other than our own, by people with varying histories, traditions, hopes, mourning, and vision for the ongoingness of their communities. No statement can begin to atone for these truths. It is our hope that this series, the voices and poetics it presents, can offer one opening through which pathways towards reparation and repatriation might find expression. So a little bit about the series that is going to be taking place throughout February and March. We're really excited to present 8 readings over the next 8 Saturdays, broadcasting from our homes to yours. After today's reading with Hannah Black and Tongo Eisen-Martin, we'll hear from Benjamin Krusling and Momtaza Mary, then Ty Freedom Ford and Terrence Hayes, Miguel Gutierrez and Ishmael Houston Jones, Nicholas Glastonbury and John Keene, Amber Dawn and Kai Cheng Tom, Jackie S. and Diana Cage, and finally, Duplan and Legacy Russell. The readings are presented and recorded through Artist Space, and we want to say thank you right up front to the Artist Space staff, Izzy Dowd, Stella Silman, Jay Sanders, and Eric Wren, who designed those crisp multicolored tiles that are catching so much attention online right now. The readings will be broadcast every Saturday at 5 sharp, so mark your calendars, tell your friends, your lovers, your family, whoever, and will be recorded and live online afterwards on the Artist Space website. And one more thing, we ask that everyone watching, if you're able, to make a $5 or more donation, all of which will go directly to our readers. Information will be given on screen during intermission, but you can Venmo at Segue-Foundation or PayPal Segue Foundation at Verizon.net. It's so easy, like various forms of mutual aid, tipping your bartenders, which we don't have this time around, and all that. So without further ado, I hand things off to my co-curator, Kay.
Thanks, Imogen. I guess I want to say a couple things. One, just about accessibility. There is a live transcript at the bottom of the screen that you can enable. It's pretty accurate. It's not 100%, but it's okay. And then I want to note about this curation, which is pretty eclectic and unites artists who work in a number of media but have some grounding in poetry. One thing I want to note is that we're trying to respond with intention to a general situation in poetry that we're observing right now. One marker of the present moment in poetry, I think, is a reconvergence between different forms of aesthetic and political radicalism. Many, if not all, of the people interested in different forms of aesthetic experiments are also pursuing those experiments because they are somehow related to the idea that life can and must be lived differently, not individually, but en masse, for everyone at once. I think this manifests broadly as an explicit communism, and I think that that's interesting. At the same time, many of the people in poetry, at least in the US, who are the most vocal about the overlaps between communism and poetry are also the most pessimistic about this relationship, maybe even about culture in general. Poetry makes nothing happen, they say, quoting poor Auden again. I was talking with the writer Cam Scott about the situation a couple years ago, and he reminded me that Auden doesn't end his thought there. Poetry makes nothing happen, he says. It is a way of happening. At a moment when crisis experienced on multiple levels is siloing some people from each other and pushing others into surprising overlap and contact, I think it makes sense for us to ask concretely, what actually are the interrelations between poetry and political movement, between aesthetic and political radicalism, without assuming in advance that we actually know those answers. What ways of happening have we intentionally or unintentionally produced together? What relations, forms of thought, and patterns of action are we enabling by participating in this mode of language alongside other simultaneous modes of language? Those are some of the questions that we're going to be thinking about together in this series. And it's our hope that at the same time, it will be basically electrifying, pretty fun, volatile, sometimes virtuosic, sexy, shocking, and everyday. And with that, we can proceed to the readers. The run of show, I'm going to introduce Hannah. Hannah will read. We will have an intermission. During that time, we invite you to donate to the readers, and the information for that is located in the chat. Then Imogen will introduce Tongo. Tongo will read, and then we'll have a Q&A. And for the Q&A, you'll see a little Q&A function at the bottom. You guys should feel free to use the chat, but you can sort of put questions for the readers into the Q&A, and that way we know to look there. Okay. So Hannah Black is an artist, and sorry, I see one question in the chat about the Venmo. If someone can post that once more, that would be great. I believe that it is at Segue Foundation without a dash. Hannah Black is an artist and writer. She lives in New York. Recent solo shows include Ruin Rien at Arcadia Missa and Dede Eberhard Phantom at Kunstverein Braunschweig. Her work was also a part of Manifesto 13 and the 2020 Busan Biennial. She is the author of Dark Pool Party and Life with Juliana Huxtable. Hannah Black knows we're in a culture war, and she fights it like a dialectician. In one hand, she's carrying a mirror, and in the other, a provisional truth, or sometimes a satire, or a really good joke, and then it's the truth again. In a performance piece called Anxietina, developed for the ICA in London in 2016, Hannah writes, "Into the scene allows something exactly not like understanding to walk through all of the less radiant strangers and into the ongoing aliveness of the attention." Something exactly not like understanding, I think, is the conceptual structure that Hannah's work, varying between speculation and realism, attempts to produce in a reader. You don't always know where you are, but you know it's deeply twisted, like the present. And in the pivot from misrecognition to misrecognition, you glimpse a mirror image of the truth. The truth is usually grotesque, not beautiful, and when it's beautiful, it's like a wonder you have made. Somebody's outcast and starving. Is it you? Mirrors are important to Hannah's work. Her 2016 Dark Pool Party repeats its paragraphs in mirror image on the left side of the page, and I think it's not just a pretty effect. Every sentence traces its own reflection. Thought raised to its own power, in the perverse reflections of the present, we find dialectics, the continual inversion of one thought into another. If this produces a grotesque image of the world, it's because we are seeing the grotesqueness as grotesqueness, sometimes for the first time. You want to say, Hannah says, you don't have to live like this. That's a version of what Badiou calls the communist hypothesis, the understanding manifested at every point that this world is not necessary. I think it's from this hypothesis that Hannah's writing cleaves so closely to the displacements and geographies of the speculative. It fastens itself to the circuits of capital and rides them to cities that do not in fact currently exist, but could. Quote, in Atlantis, I had the feeling that being interpretable and being existent are linked, that I fell outside a proper categorization and could not be digested, an extra-rabbinical animal defined as legally inedible because I belonged with contradictory habits and skeleton in too many places in the overall scheme of animals and therefore in none. In this practice of taxonomy and its interpolations and almost religious categorizations, quote, the people of Atlantis are fascinated by blackness, she writes. And I was interpolated by their perception of what blackness means just by appearing on their waterlogged streets. Hannah's writing uncovers the embarrassing afterlife of European race science in the contemporary institution of the museum. What else cowers behind the glittering facades of contemporary cultural institutions where borderless capital parks for a while, the places that Hannah refers to as a city built at night? Hannah prefaces her story of that title with Hegel's infamous face plant, where he genocidally excises Africa from what he calls the historical part of the world. She generously includes Hegel in that history that he got so badly wrong. Quote, perhaps even Hegel can grow up to be a woman from time to time, and wouldn't he be so lucky? The narrator of City Built at Night dips in and out of gender, thanks God for almost not making them a woman, which line of thought forms a parallel to the uncompromisingly real but transforming categories of racial capitalism, the ones that Hannah digs up from the sewers of European history. I say sewers because these infrastructural layers of social ideation remain not only present but functional in the contemporary circuits of thought. Gender and race, as non-identical but inseparable forms of self-possession and dispossession, pursue each other through this body of precise writing, producing an unfailing attempt to reckon honestly with their effects, their maintenance, and their reproduction. Quote, these are the four genders, male, female, unknown, and baby, Hannah writes, and then there are five genders, male, female, unknown, baby, and black. Then again, quote, God is not an autobiography, but nor is race or gender. Where do we find ourselves and how do we conceptualize ourselves among these sadistically real categories constantly in motion? Hannah answers this question through the ruthlessness of her syntax. If, as she writes, quote, analogy is reactionary because it yokes what is yet to happen to what has already taken place, what syntax bodies a different world, one of abundance instead of celebrities. Whatever, quote, whatever moves the world in general, she writes in a section called Spirit, also moves between us. Please welcome Hannah Black.
Wow, that was so nice. I'm really touched. Thank you so much, Kay, and also Imogen for inviting me. Oh, would I like to unmute? Wait, okay, whatever. Sorry, Zoom is asking me things. I've been trying to write a sort of more conventional kind of fiction thing, and I don't know how I feel about it. But so I don't know if it'll ever like fully get born or whatever, but I thought I'd read to you from like the beginning and the end, and then we'll all feel like it existed at least for a moment in time in February 2021. And it's called the book is called the working title is Tuesday or September or the End. And the title of the first chapter is January, Common Time. I kind of did the characters are all named after animals, which I find easier than doing names. Bird was sick of hearing about the aliens. At her new job, she was forced to ingest the news all day because all the TVs in the salon showed 24-hour rolling broadcasts. Oh, this is basically, okay, sorry. The thing I wanted to do was write the first 6 months of 2020 as if, or like my impressions of them as if they were a novel. So that's, but then I realized that no one wants that, or it seems I'm very responsive to what people want. And I kind of got the impression people just don't want to hear anything about 2020 or ever think about it again, perhaps. So then I added, in this version, there's also like some aliens kind of gradually appear over the course of the time as well. And I thought that would help make it more bearable to revisit, perhaps. Anyway, Bird was sick of hearing about the aliens. At her new job, she was forced to ingest the news all day. At her new job, she was forced to ingest the news all day because all the TVs at the salon showed 24-hour rolling broadcasts. No one was born wanting to pay $500 to get their hair cut and styled under the blaring, toony faces of newscasters. Although grateful for tips, much improved from her last place of work, it occurred to Bird that her clients' love of this particular salon indicated that something had gone profoundly wrong in their lives. Through her work, she got to take core samples of movements in the general mood. Since the alien object had appeared in early January, just days after America tried to provoke a war with Iran, her clients were excited, anxious, and couldn't talk about anything else. The discovery had been made on Jones Beach, so close. A classics professor who insisted on a kind of feathery 90s cut told Bird that the object resembled the oak rods used in the ceremonial prophecies at the ancient temple of Fortuna, while Bird dyed a green ombre into her hair. Sensing Bird's lack of interest, the professor asked if she thought the whole aliens thing was a hoax. Bird didn't think it was a hoax, she just didn't think it was interesting. Think of how little progress we have made as a species in communicating with whales, great apes, or each other. Humans have underdeveloped the abilities that would have made the moment of alien contact special. Sadly, as usual, there was nothing to get excited about, Bird said. Cleaning up after hours, Bird and her colleagues at the salon switched to music videos. The TV was permanently set to the hyper-realistic glaze they put on sportscasts, so everything looked like a panic attack, jumpy, too vivid, flat. Clearly, cinema was in the process of being not just technologically, but spiritually murdered by the increasingly cinematic quality of everyday life. There was an atmosphere of saturated narrative repetition in the air that felt like a simulation. But when you put your feelings aside for a second, it was probably something much more drab, like the slow death of a form of society. The news reported over and over that everyone, every living person was enraptured by the alien object. Sure, there were crowds at Jones Beach and the city had a wild, hectic, not entirely pleasant air, crammed with tourists of all kinds, many who had evidently never been to New York City before. Bird felt alone in not caring. She was sick of talking about aliens. She wanted to talk about her feelings, but her boyfriend Fox was among the enraptured ones. He went down to Jones Beach and came back with his mind made up. Just looking at the object made him believe its substance possessed a strange resonance. It really did look like oak, like the professor had said, but seemed to have been produced by technological methods. Bird was stubborn and did not want to give herself an interesting encounter with this new material. She would prefer to continue to be wrong, which did not require her to turn to face her wrongness. So while the world was raving about and obsessed with the object, in Bird and Fox's apartment, the object was equal parts alien and mundane. It was a rod of unknown material with a pattern carved into it, and the truth was, nothing else was yet known. Fox chose to spend most of his time in the staticky interior of his head. Every few hours or days or whatever, he raised his head from the glowing window of the world, his phone. The world was hidden inside his body and his body was lost outside the world. Inside the screen, the world was on fire. What had he been thinking about as he allowed catastrophe to scroll through him? A pad with notes in apparently his handwriting read, "Forget it," written compulsively, maybe 200 or 300 times. And he really had forgotten writing all that. When the subconscious said jump, then the mind that knows its own name asks how high. Bird filled his psychic and physical space with the strong smell of contraband candy-flavored jewels all day long. The weather stayed bearable, not cold enough. It was freaky, everyone said. 4 days a week, Fox went to a call center where he sat for 8 to 10 hours and listened to strangers cry and rage about their health insurance. At first, the job had been weirdly energizing. The extraordinary radiance of the suffering of strangers had electrified him. By now, it was numbing and aggravating at the same time. He had the feeling that it was possible for a person to waste their life, and this bothered him. This conservationist stance on life dried out his personality a little and focused him inward, at least more than he would have liked if he could have chosen himself from a menu. Once a month, the call center deposited money in his bank account. A lot of things could have happened since the origin of humans, a lot of forms of social organization, but at this point in history, January 2020, world of dwindling animals, the wage had achieved insane predominance as an organizing principle. Life was like a fucked up car. Some people who understood how it worked could drive it a certain distance, but it would eventually have to be taken to the scrapyard and recycled into something more bearable. As a result of his stupid call center job, Fox had become passionately interested in the electoral campaign of Moly salamanders. The elderly senator had taken advantage of a power vacuum opened up by the incredible incompetence and laziness of the Democratic Party to attempt to bring universal healthcare to the USA. While centrist Democrats were still scrambling to regain ground they had lost by having shit for brains or through their innate malevolence, Fox was not sure. Moly's campaign had gone from strength to strength, partly thanks to enthusiastic volunteers like Fox. Since the Jones Beach incident, Moley's pragmatic, cautiously optimistic stance on aliens had taken the country by storm, propelling him to the head of a wide field of candidates for the nomination. These included decrepit shark, rattled pony, soulless rat, each candidate apparently vying for who could be the least charismatic. What they had done to defend themselves against having to provide universal healthcare, i.e. make it sound stupid and complicated, they could not really do for the arrival of aliens. The aliens were popular across the entire political spectrum because everyone was sick of every person, animal, and thing on Earth. Byrd alone continued to be aggressively uninterested. She might have lifted an eyebrow at an alien declaration of war, but then she would have had to die embarrassed. In any case, the alien object remained mute, still awaiting interpretation. Byrd had moved to New York from London almost 9 years before. This sounds like it's just me, but it's subtly different, so don't worry. She came straight from the London riots of 2011. It was the last beautiful thing that happened in England. It was the last beautiful thing that happened in England. The world historical light emanating from this energetic release of grief was quickly extinguished, but Byrd experienced these riots as a tiny promise of future. She brought this with her in hope to New York City in the era of President Bullock Lama. It was strange to discover that the feeling of formless but certain doom that followed the riots and the repression of the riots in London prevailed for different reasons in New York too. As if time were thread, the future was barred by a knot that As if time were thread, the future was barred by a knot that could not be untied. Wow, I made that hard to read. This was before President Pig, murdered the dying language of politics and resurrected it as abstract poetry. Under political pressure, Pig had renounced his initial position that the aliens should be nuked. It was not popular among his base. The aliens' popularity exceeded his. He had two choices: destroy the aliens or fall in love with them. Having failed at the former, he chose the latter. He gave long, rambling speeches describing his love, the greatest and most special love any human had ever felt for any extraterrestrial being. Everyone speculated what the aliens thought of this. People behaved a little differently now that they felt like they had an alien audience, but it was hard to say how exactly. Compared to this strange present, Byrd's first few years in New York seemed freakishly chill in retrospect and lacking in sudden collective accidents. But during those years, she had been frustrated. She blamed President Lama for playing the false image of historical reconciliation like an instrument. He had climbed his inaugural stage to receive histrionic plaudits. At Last was the song that was sung. It seemed natural at the time that the first Black president was figured as the entire country finally embracing a longed-for lover after centuries of loneliness. Race, Byrd sometimes said she believed, was a social contraption primarily designed to make white people interested in sex, which they had otherwise abolished. It was the Black inauguration, she said, that had triggered the near universal psychotic break that had characterized the years since. Symptomatic disaster had mounted cube-wise at intervals of 2008, 2012, 2016, 2020. She thrilled to the distant concept of 2024. Time had gone kind of queasy and wrong within its rigid 4/4 structure, which was known in music theory as common or perfect time. Irony was a dominant affect, though it was not the only one. Box argued that the era of psychosis had begun much further back, maybe in 2001, when 9/11 marked the impenetrable skin of world power. Byrd dismissed this as too obvious. In 1971, when President Narwhal cut the regulative link between the dollar and gold. In 1609, when Jamestown settlers survived the winter, cannibalizing each other's flesh. In the red letter year of 1492, when Christopher Covid calculated the most astrologically auspicious moment to set sail based on a book that predicted the end of the world in 1789. That's a true fact. Byrd acknowledged that capital was continually shaking the world like a rag doll, but that only the supreme tautology of a Black president could fully break the collective mind. What about 1789, when a new world began to end? What about the beginning of agriculture and the social defeat of women? What about 40,000 years ago, when a bipedal hominid first uttered a sound that meant a thing and meaning sprang into being to indicate and create a gap in the total mind? No, Fox, that's too far back. Searching for an image that combined the suddenness of dramatic events with the smoothness of ongoing disaster, Bird thought of sewing, the needle puncturing the cloth over and over to form a continuous line. It was as if they all lived in anticipation of teeth snapping off the thread. Still, they would rather die than admit to ever being surprised, even by aliens. Many people pointed out that Black people had been in contact with aliens since prehistoric times. Fox did feel surprised by the aliens, but maybe it was because his mom was white. Several times a week, Fox came home from his call center job and made 2 extra hours of phone calls in his own free time for Moly salamanders. He spoke to Christian fundamentalists, teen anarchists, elderly socialists, depressed truckers, anxious mothers, burned out public school teachers, people who loved or hated Moly and wanted to tell him why, people who were in the middle of dinner and did not have time to talk. He was addicted to the rush of making contact with strangers. Mostly they talked about the alien object and about Moly's warm overtures to the aliens, his reassuring descriptions of some of the country's gentler aspirations. There was some anxiety that previous attitudes and ways of life might have been offensive or troubling to the aliens. Fox was surprised that so few people seemed afraid of alien hostility. It came up now and then, but nowhere near as much as he would have thought. The Moly calls at home gave Fox's day a symmetry that Bird accused of monotony. During the day, he told strangers the mostly bad news about their health insurance, that it would not refresh their opioid supply or cover their child's premature birth. And in the evening, he told different strangers the mostly good news about Moly salamanders. Was Moly a revolutionary? No way. Universal healthcare was good capitalist common sense. And yet Fox's enthusiasm for Moly was so fervent that it probably did have, as Bird relentlessly diagnosed, a light aura of delusion shining around it. It was not that Fox spontaneously believed, but that he chose to. He cried listening to Moly's speeches. He attended rallies. Moly salamanders is the last hope of humanity, he and his friends told each other, though afterwards they felt a tiny bit embarrassed to have used those words, which were not current. Hope, humanity. Wait, I think I'm gonna skip to the, wait, do I have time to do some of the end? Okay, right. So that was some of the beginning, and this is going to be some of the end. Oh shit, wait, we have to view in time message. Oh, some scrolling has to happen, or shall I read off this? Okay. Sorry, thank you for your patience. This is from the June section, which is like the last chapter, and it's called Or the End. The thing was, everything had become subject to death and therefore alive. So the machines and networks were as alive as ideas were, and the ghosts of the past, if you believed in them. All beliefs were alive now, that is to say, it was all dying. The cities were dying, the coral reef, the restaurant industry, the ice sheets, the gender regime. Democracy was dying, which was fine because it had never really been born. But people who really had been born were also dying, away from those who could help them die. So there was a spiritual restlessness always in the air. The riots were met with relief and gratitude among all of Bird's friends because they revived the practice of hanging out. The riots made the world new, and sadness is always old. So in that brand new summer, in the liquid return of feeling, she forgot to dwell on her losses. The losses themselves were healed by the novelty of being with others. And not only that, but seeing police cars burn. And not only that, her soul rushed toward the riot. She had no opinion about her fate. The wheel of fortune span wildly. The future was infinitely open. The death spread out into a cloud, whether you know the dead or not, Bird said to her newly definite face in the mirror, you live in a miasma of dying. An aunt she hadn't seen in a few years, a former colleague, a neighbor, no one she knew well enough to mourn seriously. The people close to her survived or avoided the disease, but the weave of being sagged with gaps like broken netting. The density of this net was an important precondition of resistance. The state tried to make holes by the grace of its plutonic capture of sex and death, but the great clock of the world kept rolling, fizzling at its underside with the brilliant shimmer of infinite chance, which was the possibility and the promise of revolution. Precincts burned in all 5 boroughs. Cops quit in their hundreds, and some immediately went down to one of the people's encampments that had sprung up around the city to confess their sins and ask for the people's forgiveness. Workers at first Trader Joe's, then all the major groceries chains refused to take payment for goods. The commodity form is non-consensual, read a banner draped over the Whole Foods on East Houston. At citywide #MeToo meetings, workers of all kinds gathered to describe the ways they had been harmed, humiliated, and degraded by their bosses. The state governor cut off supply chains to the city, hoping to starve the riot. His children publicly denounced him, but it wasn't even necessary. A group of revolutionary truckers ignored the order and drove deliveries of food and medicine through the checkpoints at full speed. Supplies flowed in from Cuba via the downtown port, which was controlled by the riot. Bird did not know where Fox was. He was living in his brother's basement in Washington Heights. Fox did not know that Bird had come back to New York. They thought of each other in their separate places. One night, chance almost brought them together in front of a looted Apple store, but Fox left to watch Trump Tower burn 5 minutes before Bird arrived. Later, neither regretted how long it had taken them to run into each other. Everyone understood at this point that chance was just fate dressed in the drab clothes that the pre-revolutionary era had forced it to wear. Skirmishes continued throughout the city, led by a hardcore NYPD contingent who would not give up even in the face of the riot's vastly superior numbers. By mid-June, everyone had grown expert in barricades, and even after the police retreated to Staten Island, they kept inland stretches of barricade intact. These remainders resembled public sculptures whose form fluctuated daily as people took parts away and added others. It became customary to refer to the network of friends and associates who held barricades according to a rotating, ever-evolving schedule. Someone had made an app as the People's Army. It was a joke because military discipline was absent. There were no rules, though behavior was endlessly discussed. There were no uniforms, though you could detect unspoken dress codes, and no fixed leaders, though of course some were listened to more than others. The term army nevertheless caused consternation in the media. Infographics and videos were shared explaining that the movement was non-hierarchical and operated according to organic principles. But perhaps the unfortunate term was why the governor finally colluded with the president in allowing the National Guard to enter the city, in scenes broadcast internationally over and over for months after a National Guard unit met with a contingent of protesters on the George Washington Bridge, and there they kneeled with the people. They burned the bridge together immediately after as a precaution against further invasion. This event appeared immediately in that night's revolutionary chants, which were as shamefully simple as love songs. It symbolized a complete break with the past. What would be done with those who still clung to this abolished past? Without universal law, each would follow their own fate. In some neighborhoods, they held trials, and in others, there were passionate murders. The problem of revolutionary tyranny melted into the discovery of each other. It was unreal. It was a dream. A public discussion on the NYPD budget outside City Hall began what no one knew then would be a 9-month public debate about what the form of the new city commune would be. At first an argument, then self-consciously evoking a new democratic form, then becoming the complicated reality of this image. The discussion spanned many subjects and continued to be referred to as City Hall. Ordinary business was dealt with, all prisoners were released, medical debt was cancelled, rent was abolished, and $5 billion of public money was given to mutual aid groups around the city. These groups had begun to organize themselves into neighborhood zones with rotating representatives of City Hall. It was decided that time had to be made for general and spiritual questions. This decision itself took 2 full days, and for some reason no one could later remember, most of this time was spent arguing about the nature of freedom. Some people argued that it was a fantasy or fear born from the pain of childhood. Others maintained that it was the concept of the individual that was at fault. But did this represent a practical hard limit on liberty, or did it demand a change in desire? Although no final conclusions could be drawn, the discussion helped a lot of people think through their attachment to the government, the war machine, and the police. It was as if everyone had begun a relationship with each other. Inevitably, there was both pleasure and pain. But in the early days, in the thrill of victory, it was easier to focus on pleasure. Across all forms, music, memes, etc., artists strove to express the weird feeling of being broken open into a new collective life. In the individual body, the riot felt as if the hands and feet had snapped off at the ends of the arms and legs, legs. The head too had hinged perfectly and cleanly from the neck, and it turned out that the body was just brimming with a universal light that now radiated outwards, as if exhausted by something like sex. You both could and could not walk around like that, because so sincerely focused on an inner satisfaction/longing. There was the long Monday when a delegation from the decommissioning team at Indian Point, the nuclear power station just north of the city, arrived to share some urgent concerns. That day, though full of logical and practical questions, was strangely emotional. Everyone felt moved and scared by the absolute reality of their situation. There was momentary harmony within the Congress. It was decided amid sentimental speeches that the budget and oversight for the decommissioning process would be offered to the Indigenous Congress that was happening simultaneously on Long Island. The break in constant argument was short. Liberal holdouts among the representatives from the mutual aid zones of Park Slope and the Upper West Side felt that the handover was irresponsible and premature, and they made their feelings clear. The Upper West Side representatives refused to attend the mass meetings, decrying them as McCarthyist. Okay, they did this once or twice a week, but at this time they took the more drastic and humiliating step of officially declaring their loyalty to the state, to Andrew Cuomo. Most New Yorkers believed that Cuomo had crossed the border into Canada, so it didn't matter. It only emphasized the obvious fact that the bourgeois neighborhoods were weak links in terms of militarily defending the city if it came to that. The more advanced of the mutual aid zones gave their liberals non-representative, honorary or harmless positions such as grocery coordination or community exercise, and thus placated, most of them stayed more or less loyal to the revolution. Some of the wealthiest in the city were strangely reluctant to leave, considering they had many places to go, but the helipads of Manhattan were often frequented by ageless vampires, sneaking a last goodbye glimpse of the skyline, a surreal image of labor that they mistook for their former victory. Bird saw a fox in the crowd. His face struck her like the ongoing shock of being able to read. You know how that shock can inspire a kind of commitment if you have stayed with me this long. Recognizing him, her body acknowledged the experience accumulated in it. Experience had not, in fact, leaked away through the many holes they had made in their love. Half obliterated by plague and aliens, then resurrected by riot, Bird moved in the direction of her love as the people declared the New York Commune from the steps of City Hall. That's the end. Thanks, that was really fun to read.
Oh my gosh, Hannah, that's really exquisite, and I'm really emotional. And I think that of all people, you will have an especially good idea about why. We're gonna go to a break, so I can cry and you can refresh your drink and whatever. The break will be at around 6 or 7 minutes. We will put up a screen which will have all the information on how you can tip our readers, and all the proceeds go to the readers. So stay tuned.
Hi, welcome back, everyone. Anna, that was amazing. I think not only water signs, as some people have texted me, but everyone is sort of sobbing after that. It was so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, welcome back. I am nervous, obviously. I'm Imogen Christian. I'm going to introduce Tongo Eisen-Martin, who is our next reader. Tongo Eisen-Martin is the author of the critically acclaimed poetry book, Someone's Already Dead, from Bootstrap Press, 2015, and his poetry has been featured in Harper's Magazine. He is also a movement worker and educator whose work in Rikers Island was featured in the New York Times. He has been a faculty member at the Institute for Research in African American Studies at Columbia University, and his curriculum on the extrajudicial killing of Black people we charge genocide has been used as an educational and organizing tool throughout the country. His most recent collection, Heaven is All Goodbyes, from City Lights in 2017 was shortlisted for the Griffin Poetry Prize and awarded the California Book Award for Poetry, an American Book Award, and a Penn Oakland Book Award. Both of those books are the fire. Please pick them up from a store that is not Amazon. Like every musician, Tongo Eisen-Martin understands that playing the note requires more than muscle memory, more than dexterity, more than finger placement and regulation of breath. To play the note, you must first listen, hear its predecessors, give credence to the space a silence inhabits, must speak the collective language of the players who first address one another, then set loose the sound, honestly, perhaps with hope. Like a song, a poem is an archive of voicing and tone, tall tale, survival map, a mystic of the concrete world. Tongo's poems, also music, also archives and theaters for the real in action, ground their resonances in a deeply active practice of listening before bursting to notation. Through association, temporal entanglements, and sharply lived observations of the terror-bound real, Tongo's poetics generate a polyphonic choral practice, less docu-poem, more sound of and in the world, garbage pile or shelf full of inner city poems, quote unquote. Where the ancestral world collides with what passes in classrooms as history, re-emerging in the mouths of neighbors, grandfathers, the sick and houseless, carceral lineages of past, present, future, of the American city and highway, it is this that we call poetry. Quote, the afterlife will be empty and walk you home, unquote. In couplets, tercets, blocks of prose shifting form, mood, trajectory across the page, Tongo's poems let loose a choir of voices, black and brown, old and young, inebriated, incarcerated, meditative, or ad hoc, pitting the sociality of neighborhood city life atop the violence constantly endured by said communities, sometimes succumbing, sometimes improvising in counterpoint, yet always gesturing toward the radical, the revolutionary might be, rendered in relation through the medium of listening, foundational. From here, the poems leap again towards possibility, overthrow, undergrounding, or play. What's most radical about Tongo's poetics are the many ways they offer us a door to an America always already slashed and burned, situating the people, the survivors of such unspeakable horror as sprigs of sapling bursting concrete, quote, made to struggle on top of people, the reformist class contradiction continues in thin air, one of the many phantom skylines collapsing. Too bad our gasoline means nothing to their world because we would certainly lend it, unquote. These are poems composed of gasoline, aimed at history books, class relations, labor dynamics, and the new boutique opening up down the street, cloaked in obliterating sheens of white. The quote, the world is this pile of worlds, Eisen-Martin writes. Maybe I'll hang on to my style a little longer, unquote. Don't mistake Tongo's poems as mere witness, chronicle, or calling in. My art is rational, he writes, therefore my life is in danger. Joy and banality, American genocides, enduring displacement of populations, traditions, families, friendships, and grief coalesce in the poem's landscape, the state of land being inseparable from the conditions experienced by those walking, singing, fighting, reaching, killing, smoking, napping, dreaming upon it. Quote, imperialism's middle class doesn't forget to buy organic, nor teenage peasants in bulk. White people will never go home. They will make colonialism work. Human life with no era, ecosystems with no expiration, consumer headache, stoner headache, strip, mall, teeth. We will all be arrested tomorrow, unquote. The vitality of these poems lives in their attention and care for the people and voices meandering through them. Children pretend they aren't hungry. Eviction, that's inevitable. Pain, that's friendship. A map, a route through waste. It's through the act of all hearing that a person understands what they're doing, the whys and for whoms. Thulani Davis writes, quote, working in new forms, stepping outside tradition is like taking a solo. The sound becomes a shape, a dance, a configuration of what we know that we have not seen or heard that way, but still with that sensibility that taught the world how to solo, solitary yet communal, disciplined and free. Unquote. In witness as well as motion, Tongo adds, quote, I'm high again, calling everything church, singing along to the courtyard, unquote. America is unthinkable, except that it is, and one need not rely on theory to say as much, although yes, theory too, but the music of voices, broken yet present, capable of joy, pain, a shared smoke, of violence, despair, and once again, bursts of visionary belief welling straight out the undercommons. Eisen-Martin's work is people, a city, street, a polyvocal community revving into jazz and facing powers that believe themselves unfaceable. But what a ruse. Quote, it's only weird when no one else plays along, unquote. Please welcome Tongo Eisen-Martin.
Shit. I need a copy of that, you know. I'm gonna put that right there on the wall, you know what I'm saying? Jesus. All street life, to a certain extent, starts fair. Sometimes with a spiritual memory even. Pre-dawn soul clap, your father dying even. Maybe I've pushed the city too far. My sensitivities to landfill districting and minstrel whistles, modal gangsterism, white supremacist graffiti on westbound rail guards all overcome and reauthored. Reauthored by revolutionary violence that chose its own protagonist or muted stage of genius. You know, the garbage is growing voices, condensed Marxism, for warrior depressives, underpasses in their pockets because they just might be deities or decent bit on the panther name, a merciful Marxism. Disquieted home life, a metaphor for relaxing next to a person who is relaxing next to a gun. I stare at my father for a few seconds, then return to my upbringing. Return to the souls of Ohio Black folks, you know, revolution damn near pagan at this point. You know what the clown wants? The respect of the ant. Wants to interpret pain only, wants to pull a 38 out of a begging bowl, wants me to hurt my hand on this pen. I'm not tired of these rooms, just tired of the world to give them a relativity. My only change of clothes prosecuted, the government has finally learned how to write poems. Shootouts that briefly align, that make up a parable. A parable like white bodies are paid well. or do white men even have leaders? Are all white people white men? A rat pitches a river, can almost taste the racial divide, can almost roll a family member's head into a city hall legislative chamber, knows who in this good book will fly. All I do is practice, Lord. Decided not to talk out of anger ever again. Met my wife at the same time I met new audience members for our pain. We pass each other cigarettes and watch cops win. A city gone uniquely linear, Harlem of the West, do a true universe. I will always remember you in fancy clothes, my wife said. So here I sit, twisting in silk ideation. Rifle made of postbellum targets made of an honest language. This San Francisco poetry is how God knows that it's me whining. Writing among the lesser respected wolves, lesser observed militarization, Dixie-less prison bookkeeping, I mean the California great coats are coming. Lynch mob gossip and bourgeois debt collection, I mean it's tempted to change professions mid-poem, and the Chicago brief and the white sergeant saying, blank slate for all of us after this black organizer is dead. Standard academics toasting $2 wine at the tank parade, bay or nothing, Lord. Nuclear cobblestones, gunline athleticism, and the last of the inherited asthma. Children giving white dolls to play with in fear, facial expressions borrowed from rich people's shoestrings. I can hear hate and teach hate and call tools by people names and name people dead to themselves. No one getting federalized, no one getting naturalized except federal agents soon. Carving the equator in the throat soon. Sorry to make you relive all of this, Lord, all of this pre-dawn monarchy, friends putting up politician posters and then snorting the remainder at a pace. A minstrel script shoveling to walls by their elders, my children sharpening quarters on the city's edge. For these audiences, I project myself into a ghost-like state. For these gangsters, I do the same. Every now and then we take a nervous look east, sleep becomes Christ, sleep starts growing a racial identity. Do you ever spiral, Lord? Has the gang age betrayed us? Be patient with my poems, Lord. Has so much pain is a point to crime. I mean, it has to be if race traders come with it. Lord, is that my revolver in your hand? You know, better presidents than these have yawned at cages, have called us holy slaves, filled the school libraries with cop documentaries. Baby, I don't have money for food. Shit, I don't have a present moment at all. I go to the railroad tracks and follow them to the station of my enemies. A cobalt-toothed man pitches pennies at my mugshot negative all over the United States. There are toddlers in Iraq. I see why everyone out here got in the big cosmic basket and why blood agreements mean a lot and why I get shot back at. I understand the psycho-spiritual refusal to write white history or take the glass freeway, white skin tattooed on my right forearm. Ricochet sewage near where I collapse into a rat-infested manhood. My new existence is living graffiti. In the kitchen with a lot of gun cylinders to hack up. House of God in part, no cops in part. My body brings down to Christmas. The new bullets, pray over blankets made from the old bullets. Pray over the 28th hour's next beauty mark. Extrajudicial Confederate statue restoration. The waistband before the next protest poster. Hey, by the way, time is not an illusion, Your Honor. I will save your deaths for last. You are witty, Your Honor. You're moving money again, Your Honor. It is only raining one thing. Non-white cops and prison guard shadows reminded me of spoiled milk floating on an oil spill, a neighborhood making a lot of fuss over its demise, a new lake for a Black Panther party, Malcolm X's ballroom jacket slung over my son's shoulder, the figment of village and new news to a new white preacher, all in an abstract painting of a president that bought slavery some time, didn't it? The tantric screeches of military bolts and election Tuesday cars, a cold-blooded study in leg irons, and proof that some white people have actually fondled nooses. And sundown couples made their vows of love over opaque peach plastic and bolt action audiences. You know, the Medgar Evers second is definitely my favorite law of science. Fondle news clippings and primitive Methodists, my arm changes imperialisms. Simple policing versus structural frenzies. Elementary school script versus even wider white spectrums. Artless bleeding and the challenge of watching civilians think. Terrible rituals they have around the corner. They let their elders beg for public mercy. I'm gonna go ahead and sharpen these kids' heads in the arrows myself and see how much gravy spills out of family crest. Modern fans of well, with their t-shirt poems and t-shirt guilt and me having on the cheapest pair of shoes on the bus, I have no choice but to read the city walls for signs of my life. You know, first, I should have apologized to the souls of the house because, you know, I'm wearing the cheekbones of the mask only. Like a pill bottle whose name is yours, name tagged on the side of a factory of risks. I mean, teeth of the mask now. Back of the head of the mask now. A new phase of anti-anthropomorphism fended for real faces. Stuck with one of those cultures that believes I chose this family. I'm not creative, just the silliest of the revolutionaries. My blood drying on my only jacket, the police state psychic middleman evangelizing for the creation of an unmasked and unmeasured blood of a lamb less racialized or awesome prison sentence. A right angle made between a point on a Louisiana plantation and a 5-year-old's rubber ball 3 feet high and falling like a deportee plane to complete my interpretation of garden variety genocide. I am small talk about loving your enemies a little more realistically, about paper tigers and also gold. You know, I need my left hand back. Broke my neck on a piano key, found paradise in a fist fight. Maybe I should check into the Cuban line. Watching the universe's last metronome, some call Black Jacobins. Hey, just wait. These religions will start resigning in a decade or two. Some colorfully, some transactionally, in a cotton gothic society, class betrayal on glasses. I mean, ironically, my window started fogging over too as I was trying to figure out which Haiti would get me through the winter, which poem houses souls, which socialist breakthroughs. Breakthroughs like taking 10 steps back and then finally trying stillness, like introducing Gabriel Prosser to Thelonious Monk. I remember childhood. I remember the word childhood being a beginning. Scribbling on an amazing grace, I rented this body from some circumference of slavery. Remember being kicked out the Midwest. Strange fruit theater, lithium in circuses, like-minded stomachs, the ruling class blessing their blank checks with levy foam, with opioid tea, sentient dollar bills yelling to each other pocket to pocket, cello stands in the precinct for accompanying counter-revolutionaries. My mother raised me with a simple pain. A poet loses his mind, you know, like the room has weather, or first girlfriend gravity. A difference between me and you is that the madness wants me forever. A pair of apartments defining both my family and political composure. Books behind my back, bail money paved into the streets playing euphoria, euphoria, cliche. Bracing for the medicine's recoil. Sharing a dirty deli sandwich with my friends. Black Jacobins, underground topography of a grandmother's hand. Psychology of the mask now. Teeth of the mask again. You know, apparently too much of San Francisco was not there in the first place. And this dream requires more condemned Africans, to put another way, state violence rises down, or still life is just getting warmed up, or army life is looking for a new church and ignored all other suggestions, or folktale writers have not made up their minds as to who is gonna be their friends. I mean, this is the worst downtown yet. And I have borrowed a cigarette everywhere. I mean, I've taken many a walk to the back of a bus that led on out the back of a storyteller's prison sentence, then on out the back of slave scars, but this is my comeback face. I left my watch on the public bathroom sink and took the toilet with me. Threw it at the first bus I saw, eating single mothers half alive. It flew through the bus line number, then on out the front of the White House. Hopefully you find comfort downtown, but if not, we brought you enough cigarette filters to make a decent winter coat. A special species of handshake. Let's all know who's king and what's the lifespan of uniform cloth. This coffin needs to quit acting like those are birds singing. Rusty nails have no wings, have no voice other than that of a white world dying. In book pages in the gas pump, catchy, isn't it? The way 3 nooses is the rule, or the way potato sack masks go so well with radio codes, or the way condemned Africans fought their way back to the ocean, only to find waves made of 1920s burnt up piano parts, European backdoor deals, and red flowers for widows who spent all day in the sun mumbling in San Francisco. Red flowers, but what's the color of a doctor visit? There are book titles in the streets. Book titles like Hero, You Make a Better Zero, or Hey, Fur Coat Lady, the President is Dead, or Pay Me Back in Children, or They Hung Up Their Bodies in Their Own Museums, and other book titles pulled from a drum solo. Run here, hero, lie at the hiding place. All the bullets in 10 precincts know where to go. There's no heaven or any other good idea in the sky. Politics means that people did it and people do it. Understand that when it's San Francisco and other places that was never really there. I bet this ocean thinks it's an ocean, but it's not. It's a 6th dimension street. I don't know who's king. King of thin things, you know. Like America, I'm proud to deserve to die. I'm gonna eat my dinner extra slow tonight in this police state candy dispenser you all call a neighborhood. No set of manners goes unpunished. Never mind a murderer's insomnia or the tea kettle preparing everyone for police sirens. Capitalists dropped 10 tons of barbed wire onto my Tuesday shift. We shot back at the chimpanzee pilot for the sport. The contractor has already smoked 3 cigars only 1 hour into my court appearance shift. Supervisor likes the smell, says it reminds him of when he ran the streets, and all I remember is we shot back. A gated puppet dances along. Bars and Jig says, I'm the happy one of Legion. And meanwhile, kids commit childhood behind his wooden plaster joints. Wire dodgers under this silly puppet, a silly puppet dancing for white heaven. Like weapon is the jacket and precinct holds Friday hostage. We go through a fossil jawed and see a judge. The tunnel at the end of the light. I sleep until I'm woke by dry cereal and surrender. I mean, this holding cell only needs a giant panhandler's palm to shake us coin men around. I'm breaking my fingers for my sister's bill collectors. Garage casket open. I mean, all third world parallels kill openly. Breaking my lungs for my sister's rent. I'm the sculptor of construction dust. I miss cigarettes by mid-morning. I miss Hennessy by sundown. I miss murder by inches. $5 bills cherish my days outside, always behind. It's just no concentration in this courtroom. Just a bunch of B+ students living out their nightmares. How do I plead with a straight face? 2 blocks up is a reoccurring cliff, along with slavers' paraphernalia, along with an ordinary panhandler, along with ethnic parade history, along with the ethnic parade, along with 13th graders. But yeah, let's talk about the fact that 4 dead children later, I still don't have a problem beating you up in front of everybody. Let's talk about the fact that money is death. Down to my last $5 is what I call this shoe. 10 o'clock political education is what I call this dream. I got the job is what I call this blues. 2 days later is what I call the cliff. Capitalists eat until the world is blurry to them. You know, these streets are made of saliva. And some people made of saliva too. They usually got on uniforms. While the crazy man spins round and round trying to make a record out of this mass production jungle. Maybe I'll join them, count cash and cry. I mean, these streets are made of saliva and white sheets are worn by a building in which kids are supposed to learn how to read well. White sheets in the highway too. Another mayor needs their head on a pipe. One down is just one down. But you know, if you tell all this to the masses, your teacher will pipeline you. They told me I was jewelry. They told me this is jungle. Well, maybe not jungle, more like 50 machine guns planted in the ground. And it's raining faces again in California. And what does it say about heaven? What does it say about the people you killed? Waiting lines got so exhausted, a million minds dropped all these faces at once. If the fascists can read the lips of a giant talking in his sleep, we might as well make our demands in prison letters. Today was born the most important trigger finger in the world. Today I began to count down the pages between now and a pile of books by a ton of Chicago is going to walk out of Chicago one day. Babies that drag street signs like old toys. Today, the most important letter left prison. Babies that laugh at flags like faces that have disappeared. Maybe I'll join them. But for now, you know, these streets are made of saliva and we raise half full of glasses to the basements that meant nothing. And the working poor who live there, we get shot. We get white sheets on California, where the kitchen table likes to talk as much as the walls. And romance on the porch consists of hard residing. I mean, this picture characters talk spit and know that they hard to kill. The kitchen table knows this. The porch is almost convinced that one down is just one down. This town is coming to town. A circus watching itself. Half distracted, half suicidal, thrilled children dressed as cops, thrilled children preaching and policing and intaking and hiring and snatching your money. This town's coming to town with tough trademarks to follow. Today, I watch capitalism walk on water and people play dead so that they could be part of a miracle. I talk facing away from the dead. They replaced me with the change in my pocket, a penny that's yet to be invented. They say, you have to know how to cut a throat on the way to cutting a throat. After sleeping on a mattress made from 2 garbage bags of clothes, I became content with the small gestures of plantation fires. I mean, playing with couch ashes, I realized how weird the universe was. It exists in so many places, so many random things that interrupts me while I'm trying to dream. And like your clay correspondence, Lord. To be transparent, I had 20 books next to a bullet like an old man giving advice at the beginning of a revolution. I've really done it, Lord. Explored the mumbles of my mind. Explored what's naturally there, and I found no brainwashing. I found Africa, Lord. I have a future. It takes place in the diasporic South. I have morning possessions, modern militancy. I mean, windows to the South. I'll walk on a missile for food. I guess you'll not want flowers for a few years, Lord. Will I be tied face to face with the country I murdered merge with us, Lord? Our old metal versus new metal. Our old metal versus a pool of meandering and peerless faces of multiculturalism of sorts. The dead replaced me with a comedian's chest cavity instead of a chest cavity held tight. It takes a violent middleman for me to talk to myself. Stories that travel through other people's stories. A song about a song, a hemisphere about a hemisphere. Stories that travel through a conquered poet. My mother remembers Africa, Lord. She killed on behalf of you, Lord. I wore a machete all winter and no one asked me what it meant. I read 1,000 books in front of the world. What I do is fight poems and sleep through decadent San Francisco prayer circles. Watch people play for post-working class associative services, recreations of a governor's desk. Ruling class art of utility playing find a sociopathic bureaucrat. A day white people scared even easier. TV in a basket next to a ceramic baby wearing ceramic armor, musket progeny fantasizing through the art of the poor. Their trendy latches locked before God. Black art hunted down like a dog. Hand over my friends, Lord. Lord, I think I'm gonna die in a war. Unelected white people in my small house like a blues song of no spiritual effect, a dollhouse H-bomb, a pony show near dead bodies, apartheid weddings that go right, apartheid white people who give birth to mathematicians, the spiritual continuity of barracks and police stations, a chemical interpretation of a Sunday trip to church, church smells in their pockets, a river mistaken for a talking river, no autobiography outside of small personal victories of violence and drug use, made in the image of God's trinkets, where white abolitionists confided in their children about. Chemical assurances that they will switch from Black artists to white artists, from Black God to white God, from Black worker to white worker. And I think about you cautiously, Lord. In the same way I think about my childhood, Lord. Foxhole Friday nights, most of life is mute. A comedian points out a planter's field to a priest, King Sugar Cane, King Cotton King, revolutionary to Bala Central, containing all modes of shallow introduction, introducing, an unlisted planter class speaking about fevers and balance sheets and reassuring the masses that we can figure out our fathers later, man. A priest took my mother lightly, Lord. Stood in front of parishioners, re-raveling fantasies about Black art. Priest reading confidently before I broke him and broke his parallel. You know, after the day, I've never been a poet before. Little brother watches his big brother's friends. They leave rifles on shelter walls. They agree with me and call it literature. It's a simple matter, this revolution thing. To really lie to no one. To keep nothing God-like. To write a poem for God. The end.
Thank you so much, everyone. Tongo Eisen-Martin. That was incredible. I was on mute screaming the whole time, like I know everyone else was. We're gonna start a Q&A session. So everyone's gonna be invited in. Let's see. Okay.
Hey.
Hi, Hannah. Hi, Tongo.
Wow.
Oh my God. It's a simple matter, this revolution thing. I mean, I think Imogen and I have like a bunch of questions, but also it seems like we have like Adjua sent a question already. So I don't know, can you guys see that? Do you want to jump in with that one? We can read it out loud for everyone if you want. The question, a question for both Hannah and Tongo. How does your work help you live? How do words like the ones we heard today sit in your imagination and memory? How does their presence in your mind impact the life you live between creation and performance? So while Hannah and Tongo are thinking about that, audience, if you want to send questions, best to put them into the Q&A, and that will be the easiest to see. And so we don't have to also look at the chat, which is scrolling very rapidly. So over to you guys.
What was the question?
Can you see it on your screen?
Oh, maybe, yeah. Oh.
If you scroll down to the bottom.
How does them work help me live? Wow.
If you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a kind of Q&A thing. And
yeah, I'm reading out loud from
Oh,
it.
sorry, I apologize. Yes, thank you, yes.
I mean, wow, that's such a beautiful question. Thank you for the beautiful question. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like it does the opposite, or it expresses something I'm not good at in living. So maybe it helps me stay with that or something. But I mean, probably that's the most negative possible way to express it. I don't know why I want to say it so negatively. Maybe it's embarrassing in some ways as well, how much it helps me live. I think I have a really romantic idea of language, where I have a sort of like in a way where I'm like trying to be like a materialist in a political sense or whatever, but I think I have a sort of kind of almost like ontologized idea of language where like I don't know, like a bit like you get in like certain, I mean, I guess like Judaism has a version of that or whatever, or the like writing metaphors for reality, for what God does or something. But so I guess you're like, and I think there's a part in the book where the current version where someone's like explaining to the aliens and trying to explain, which is something that me and my friend Toby both found we had in common, that having had the daydream about trying to explain about Black people to aliens, she'd have to like be like, okay, so don't freak out, but like whatever. So anyway, she doesn't get into transatlantic slavery or anything, but like but it's like about lots of different things. But at some point but at the end she says like, there's infinitely more world than I can explain, but not infinitely, because I've told you some of it, or something like that. And I guess it's that kind of sense of like, it's the like bound against a kind of infinite or something. Yeah, sorry, that's like a very like I don't know. That's my like stoner answer.
Man, I would just add, it's weird. And forgive me, in my head the instruments are off. You know what I mean? So just somebody give me a wink if I should just stop talking. but what you know, I mean, one is just like this living, you know, like living politically, or living critically, is not, you know, it's not kind of like a linear evolution. I find myself back in certain places, you know, back in consent to empire, you know, back in you know, some kind of you know, ego ridden you know, relationship to craft. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm really clicking and you know, doing what a human being is supposed to do. The groovy thing about craft is it is almost a way, or the poems are a way for me to integrate all of kind of my potentials, or have all these different, you know, where the different threads of being a human being really cooperate. And at a certain point, the walls start to melt a little bit between like, well, when is the poem started, when is the conversation start, or when is the poem started, ended, conversation began. It's like it becomes, if you know, with praxis, it becomes more of one one kind of like effort of my mind in a way, but completely like, completely beholden to praxis. All that to say, like, without actually trying to, without getting outside my comfort zone as far as movement, work, or whatever. I'd be in a cardboard box. You know? But I don't know where that ends, but I'll just stop talking.
Cheers. There's so there's another question in the Q&A box from Divya Victor. If there is time for this, I have a question about living with political fear as an articulation of pessimism in the limbic system. Tongo and Hannah, how does the daily experience of fear affect your work? Does it enter as experience, or does the work keep it out, or how do they, I believe that's live together? So I guess whoever wants to go first with that. And if other people want, the Q&A box is open. And if you don't, I do have questions.
I think I refuse it. I think I refuse it all the time. I have lots of practices I use to refuse it, and I spend a lot of time on that. I'm what I call lazy, but I think it is because I won't be afraid. I refuse to be afraid because I feel like there's been a sort of like, I think it's the like constant apocalypse model. When you're in the like 500-year apocalypse model, I mean, you have to also be in the like, you can't, it's not real to only be in that. You have to live now in your actual life. So there's also the like punctual apocalypse, but I think there's a sort of that's the like background or something. So then I do a lot of like I do like meditation and yoga, and I smoke weed, and I recently I've like added sleep to that. I never used to be good at going to bed early, but like now I'm trying to, I feel like it is tough right now because there's a extreme like jaggedness in the atmospheric jaggedness around. So I think but I mean, obviously a lot of people can't do that because they have like a lot of other stuff to do. So I think it's just like coming out in other ways. Like I think a lot of relating is really hard right now. So I guess I'm not experiencing the fear. I guess it's political fear, but I experience it through everything, through like through the daily experience of fear. So that's, I guess that's also how you're experiencing it then. Does the work keep it out? I don't know. I guess maybe this is such a beautiful question again. I feel like the way that's almost like how, like, because I was reading it as I was answering it as I read, because I was so struck by it. I think, maybe it's where they meet, like the work is where there's the kind of like what you have to let it, I guess you have to like let something in more. I guess it does feel like there's a kind of emotionally regulative thing I'm doing a lot of the time that I have to like kind of then like not do in order to work, kind of. So like that's how it like leads up to the work or whatever. Yeah, thanks for this question. I think I'm like thinking about this as I'm speaking, so thanks.
Yeah, I second the meditation, the meditation and just kind of like reading on internal cultivation and just ways of relating to fear, but I almost deal with it as its own food group. I think one of the kind of one of the weaknesses, or actually something that Kathleen Cleaver told me, right? If I could name drop, she said she told me that one of her critiques of the Black Panther Party back then, or what she felt they were missing, was a kind of a component of healing, some kind of spiritual component. Of course, she didn't like have a prescription. She hadn't been born again into something else. But the kind of adding the almost like the muscle of healing to to your movement organism is I think is crucial and plays out with you, because we the danger is, or the hegemonic thinking holds that, well, I have to be effective, right? and then and we all become like football coaches or something, you know what I mean? It's that thing, right? And we reduce ourselves to tasks and stuff like that, and evaluate ourselves. Well, how effective are we, and what do we have to become more effective? When ultimately, you know, to neglect kind of to neglect your internal weather is you know, is a recipe for implosion. And it's good news for us too, trying to figure out what to do now, you know, because it is, you know, I think our generation has the opportunity to you know, to kind of shore up some of those psychic weaknesses that movement had in the past, that made it some of that hegemony that didn't get cleaned out, you know.
That's so clarifying. Thanks both. Imogen, is it okay if I leap in with a question?
Yeah, sure.
And maybe we can take this to like 35 minutes past the hour. Okay, so I am thinking of, Imogen, the thing that you said in your intro to Tongo about the chorus. And I'm reminded of this part of Mark Novak's Social Poetics, where he's talking about like teaching classes, poetry classes to like people in like unions and nannies and taxi drivers and stuff like this. And he talks about like incorporating kind of like communal language or finding ways to speak in sort of different voices. And I guess so I can hear that in different places in both of your work. And I'm curious how you think about like, you know, writing in one voice, writing in your voice, writing in a multitude of voices. How does this come in for you? How does it come in for you? What does it feel like? What are some ways you get there?
We're gonna keep this same pattern.
You can do whatever you like.
Can I tack on something to the end of that question? I'm also interested in the somatic experience of all of that. Like how that feels.
How does it feel?
Yeah, how does it feel in your body?
When
you're actually writing the poem with all of that in mind.
You know,
can I have? Okay, no, you can answer.
No, go ahead.
I don't think I fully understand the question. I just don't fully understand the question, I think. Can I have a like some like?
Oh yeah, sorry. The really simple version is like when you're writing, you know, how are like when you are writing, how do you write your work in a way that it speaks in a do you write in your work in a way that speaks in a multitude of voices? Is it just you? I mean, Hannah, where I was thinking about this with your reading, where like the crowd becomes a subject in that June passage. So actually, I mean, I'm not trying to sort of feed you an answer to my own question, but like yeah. I was sort of seeing some of these dynamics, like elements of like, I don't know, polyvocality or a multitude of voices or a chorus or ways that are not just a sort of like singular lyric eye, you could say.
I think it's also like a style of storytelling that happens then that's more like you can, I don't think it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's true. It's true. I think I have, again, it's my secret, like intense, like romanticism about like, writing that I have to like constantly fight against. I think that's maybe a lot of what's like gives some sort of dynamism to my work, is I think I'm someone who's extremely sentimental about writing, like constantly trying to make myself less so or whatever. And that I do have to be like something flows through me kind of model or whatever. Like I feel like there are historical traditions that are ways of being that have all sorts of ways they like kind of weirdly transmit across all the many levels of like being a person, and yeah, so that like I'm sort of expressing them in some way or whatever, and that maybe people have different like modes, like maybe for some people that would be like the way they like, I don't know, it's the same as how like in Chinese medicine they talk about how like the cook's qi is in the food or whatever, like something, there's a like there's a like an energy of a person that's an expression of history that is something that if you're right, that like writing is about a certain transparency to that obviously is going to have the form, like you're trying to be like you're trying to be as like transmit as much of that as possible, but obviously it has to be like in the form of yourself or whatever. Like it's not, I think I used to fantasize a lot about some direct transmission, and now I'm like, oh, you kind of have to be interested in form. And that's like, I really liked it, Tongo, when you began with like the groovy thing about craft is or whatever, and it's like kind of the way it does sort of synthesize things or integrate, I think you said, or yeah, because I think that's been something like almost like hard to accept, that you don't get these like direct, you're not only doing direct transmission, but I still think there's something about that has to be happening to like animate something. And yeah, that's because it has a sort of somatics or whatever. I also can feel, I felt, yeah, I can feel like, yeah, I kind of feel, I mean, this is so simplistic to say, obviously you always register in your body if something's going well or badly or whatever. Like I can kind of feel, yeah, and I feel like reading out loud is helpful for me, even if I'm writing something to be read, because I feel like that's one of the ways I understand how, like, yeah, if like how the sentence is or something.
Yeah, man, I'm getting all kind of weird sound things going on my side. It's all good. Multi-vocal for sure over here. You know what I mean? You know, that's kind of my, it's almost, it's kind of become my comfort zone. That was once like my prayer to the cosmos to give me. See, I used to write super first person camera angle, like, and got just tired of it. And I didn't know exactly what it was supposed to look like, or you know, but that's all I just wanted more more voices. It's trippy. It actually don't feel like anything. Tell you the truth, the interesting leap and bound in a kind of, what do you call it, polyphonic style actually coincided with like writing while bored and frustrated and uninspired, in order to get, or what I would get lucky enough to discover, that to get into a lucidity of craft that I didn't have when it was kind of a dance with euphoria, you know, or a dance with catharsis. You know, it is, I don't try too hard, you know. It's almost like like, you know, like you have a dream, like you have a dream with 100 people, 1,000, you probably dreamt of 1,000,000 people that you've never seen or know or met. Well, at least I don't know what happens to anybody else, but all I do is see people I don't know, right? And you just think about like how effortless that universe is created. I don't, you know what I mean? Like where it's there. I wouldn't try to codify it. Nor would I trust anybody who could tell me, who would think they could tell me exactly what's going on. But I think like if you relax, there is a multitudes there, and you can ride the small little, like the small, you know, there are like little weather patterns within yourself that you can kind of ride. So if I get like, so I try to stay pretty centered when I write, but if I'm a little grumpy, you know, the voice gets older, you know. If I'm kind of calm, the voice actually gets like kind of academic, you know. This type of thing, like, so you can kind of get to know yourself, and voices kind of move around. I think it's like the trick is to think of yourself just as much as a vessel of things going out, a vessel of things coming in, or, you know, you are both the universe talking and the universe listening. So if you can, it's a nice little sweet spot, like in between them, you can kind of just relax into there. You know, there's just you're offered a lot, because, you know, the groovy thing about this poetry is like we're really everybody all in one. Like I'm really a journalist, an academic, a playwright, you know what I mean? A movie director, you know, a philosopher, all this, but just like if I had to actually do it, I'd be terrible. But I can take all of them and do them all irresponsibly in a poem, you know? So it's just, it's just like, it's not, I don't know, that's it. It's natural. It's natural. Oh, but one thing though that I will campaign for, what I did notice over time as far as like feelings go, I did notice that there is kind of this this evaluator that has this evaluator voice that has the finger on the like dopamine button in your brain. And so, well, you know, when you're writing, it will listen and be like, oh, can we get high off of this line, right? And if so, it'll push the button and then you'll be thrown down that rabbit hole. Or if not, then you can kind of get hit with a brief depression. To boycott that voice has been crucial. And a way of boycotting that voice is to keep your attention on almost using kind of meditative tactics, like just to keep your attention on, you know, your actual physical reality as you're experiencing it, you know, second for second, like to actually deal with the sensations for what they are, just sensations, to deal with the mood for how it actually, what it actually exists as, like what's the actual energy of it, how it feels like if you place some attention there, it feels weird because this like more subconscious voices have to do more work, but they actually are, I found actually more sophisticated. Like me sitting me sitting here trying to, you know, quarterback some kind of conversation, has nothing, like, you know, has nothing on what's just kind of already down there percolating. If that's some, you know, if that's of any help.
Oh, I mean, I love the idea of poetry doing everything else irresponsibly. And I also think that my poems are smarter than me.
There you go.
I think we probably, to be respectful of people's time, because we said we would end at past. I think we should probably close it there. Thank you both so much. This is
Thank
an
you.
astonishing start to our curation. Our hearts are absolutely going out
This
to
is
you.
so nice. I'm so happy for this pairing. I feel very blessed. Thank you.
Same.
Thank you.
And the quadrupling as well, the whatever, and the quadding.
And maybe we can get, as we close, we can just get the Artist Space folks, we can get the donation information one more time. Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Tongo. Thank you, everyone who came. Thank you, Artist Space. And thanks, Imogen. This is going to be great.
Right on.
Bye.
See y'all next week.